Joining us now from ESPN, and I'm old enough to remember when he was with the New York Times. He's Don Van Natta here on The Drive on ESPN 700. What's up, Don? How are you, man?
I'm great, Spence. How you doing?
Doing really well. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Sure.
I want to talk about the origin story for Backstory before we get into specifics. I mean, it's such a fascinating idea. I think so highly of both you and Wright. I mean, I'm excited to watch all this. How did this idea, how was it born? What's the origin story? How did it come to fruition?
It's a great question. So John Dahl, who is the co-founder of the great 30 for 30 documentary film series, actually greenlit a film that was done by Robert Abbott, another terrific journalist and filmmaker, called The Last Days of Night. You may know about that documentary. It was a 30 for 30. That focused on Robert Abbott's sort of journalism journey and everything that happened in the firing of Bobby Knight. They loved how that film turned out. And so it was John Dahl's idea to first call Wright Thompson and tell him he wanted to develop a series similar to that, where a reporter sort of goes on a journey to discover the truth or fresh information and new insight about a past sports controversy. And Wright dropped my name. I met with John Dahl last year, and the three of us decided to team up and create Backstory. It's kind of cool.
Awesome. No, it is awesome. And what can viewers and listeners expect to see as far as your approach? What's the ethos? How are you going to attack this thing?
Yeah, so the way we're attacking is almost like a cold case for sports journalism. So in our first season, we have 5 topics, 5 episodes where I'm going to sort of investigate and try to peel back layers and try to bring new reporting, fresh insights into a story you think you already know. It's a really ambitious goal, but I think we've hit it on the first episode. I feel pretty confident that we did in the Serena Naomi Osaka match that ended in tears last year at the U.S. Open and the U.S. Open final. But in all of these episodes, I think the viewer will be taken along on a sort of almost a detective kind of journey or journalism journey with me as I go and dig into these topics, talk to people. Some of them are journalists who covered the story. Some of them are the protagonists. Other people are sort of experts that might have been overlooked to put together what we hope is a really compelling, entertaining 1 hour of television for each of these episodes.
How did you end up with sports being and I'm not going to say end game, but I mean, that's not where you started. And like I said, I'm familiar with your work from the Times. And what drew you to sports, and why is that currently your passion?
Well, I was always sort of a frustrated would-be sports writer when I was at the Times. I wrote 2 books about sports. My first book was about presidential golf called First Off the Tee way back in 2003, and I had a great time doing that. I played a round of golf with Bill Clinton for that book, and then I did a biography of Babe Didrikson-Zaharias in 2011. And I had an opportunity. ESPN came calling me in the summer of 2011 and asked if I would be interested in joining them to do just sports investigative reporting. And as I looked around, it was a pretty wide open playing field, and I quickly started thinking about a lot of stories I wanted to do. And I wasn't just a frustrated would-be sports writer. I was a frustrated sports fan. There were a lot of stories just as a sports fan that I felt were not getting covered. So a chance to do that. I was in my mid-40s at the time. It was a golden opportunity to kind of reinvent myself at that stage of my career. Felt I had done just about everything that I wanted to do at the Times, and so this was just a great chance to try something new. And I've had a blast in the 7 years I've been at ESPN. It's been so much fun. We
live in a really unique time and a unique climate in a lot of ways, Don, and I know part of your background is really indissolubly linked in politics and your work with Hillary Clinton and your interest that way. And the old saying that we get now, if you're in sports media, anybody who listens or consumes your content will tell you to stick to sports, which is just impossible. If you're a citizen of the world or the country, it's not a thing that's responsible to do, in my opinion. How do you find that you've been able to traverse the path best to marry those two worlds, if that question makes sense?
No, it does. And it's a very good question. It's obviously a very relevant question because ESPN President Jimmy Pitaro has a very clear policy. It's like a rule on the clubhouse wall that says, you can't delve into politics if it's completely separate from sports. Now, in 2017, that whole national anthem controversy that happened with the president, and the National Football League was on its heels, as you'll recall, in the first weeks of the season, reeling about how to deal with that controversy. My colleague Seth Wickersham and I did several deep dive investigative pieces, long narratives about what happened. So I think anytime that sports and politics and culture, those issues mix, it's fair game to not only cover it as a reporter or as an investigative reporter, but also talk about it as a commentator. But in my past life, it's a little bit like been there, done that. I don't feel a need to. I certainly have very strong opinions of what's going on in this country right now, but I don't feel a need to blast them out on Twitter. It's against my company's policy. I respect that. Those are the rules of the road. It's sometimes hard not to do it, but I feel that that's the best thing for me right now. And a lot of my colleagues are also doing that. So I'm going to abide by the rules of the road for the time being. But I got to tell you, I don't feel. And this might be because I covered the impeachment of Bill Clinton. I covered 9/11 and the aftermath of it. I was in Europe for a few years covering counterterrorism. I don't feel a hankering to be covering politics right now. I really don't. There's no pull there. I feel like I did that for a lot of years, and I'm really excited about the challenge that I'm now wrestling with, particularly with Backstory and getting it off the ground.
And it's certainly a much safer space, but it doesn't mean you guys are not taking risks. And when it comes to what happened with the 2018 U.S. Open, Don, I remember it. I remember watching it. I remember consuming the news cycle. But I think one of the cool things about what you're doing is even being in this space for what I do for a living, I don't remember what happened afterwards, and I have no idea what led up to it, which I think is fascinating about what you're going to do. So let's focus in on this one specifically. Now that you've been able to dig into it, what are your takeaways, and what can people expect on Sunday?
Well, You're right. There was not a lot of talk, certainly during the match, about what Serena Williams brought to that court in her background. She had three highly emotional clashes with chair umpires and with a lines judge at the U.S. Open prior to that. And if you remember during the match, she said, "This keeps happening to me here. Why does this keep happening to me here?" So we begin Act 1 looking at that background as well as Carlos Ramos, the chair umpire from Portugal. We look at what he brought to the chair that day and his background. Turns out he was in the chair for dozens of matches with Serena Williams, including in that particular U.S. Open in 2018, a match when Serena played her sister Venus. Ramos was the chair umpire, which was not discussed during the broadcast. So I think Act 1 really sets up the backstory leading up to when the match begins, and then in Act 2 and Act 3 of the match, we really slow things down. All three of those very controversial code violations, particularly the first one where Ramos calls coaching by Patrick Mouratoglou, Serena's longtime coach, with that hand motion. We have a split screen that shows it very clearly to the audience that as Mouratoglou was moving his hands forward, Serena was looking directly at his box. New reporting that we have, one of the things we reveal on Sunday, is that Carlos Ramos called the coaching code violation because he not only saw the hand motion by Mouratoglou, but saw Serena look toward the box. Even though under the rules, all that matters is he had to just see the coaching signal go on. So there's a lot new there. And then the final act is all the aftermath, and we really go dig deeply into that. The aftermath in the minutes and first hour right after the match. We have a lot of new information about what happened there, including how Serena and Ramos dealt with each other. I don't want to give too much away about that. And then even that moment, you may remember the USTA CEO, Katrina Adams, during that trophy celebration. They called it a trophy celebration, but Naomi Osaka, who won her first Grand Slam title, was in tears. I mean, you had a champion, a first-time Grand Slam champion in tears, something you never see. And yet Katrina Adams told the audience that this wasn't the finish that we felt we wanted to see, and she then, praised Serena Williams as a great champion, while Osaka was crying. And so why did that happen? And that was one of the questions that I had, and we explore that in Act 4. We also look at gender bias. Serena Williams said a lot about that on the court and in the post-match press conference, so we look at gender bias in tennis and the way calls are made. We look at that pretty carefully in Act 4. So there's a lot here. There's a lot to unpack about it, and as you know, the match, divided friends and families, blew up on social media, and tennis was talked about for weeks. And we look at a little bit of that too, and how it, became the hot topic in the culture in America and beyond for weeks after the match.
Do you think, Don, and I'm trying to think the best way to ask this, do you think narratives will be changed as a result of what you've done? Because as you referenced, it seemed like there was an instantaneous reaction as far as opinion. and it was either Serena's a prima donna, oh my gosh, here she goes again, or oh my, holy smokes, this guy certainly has something in for her. This doesn't seem fair. So, do you think, as a result of the work that you've done and what people see on Sunday, minds will be changed?
Well, that's the hope. The hope is, you're absolutely right. People got so siloed, and they made almost instantaneous decisions. And by the way, another thing in the film that we're really proud of, there were two exchanges between Serena and Ramos during changeovers, where you learned a lot, actually, about how she felt, how he felt. But both times when those went on, ESPN was into a commercial break. Now, there was clips of it, but they were sort of taken a little bit out of context. So that also, I think, will help people maybe look at this in a fresh way. But that's certainly the hope of any journalist. When you do a deep dive, a narrative like this, you're bringing new information to viewers or to readers. You hope that maybe they'll reconsider. But, of course, in this era, as you know, a lot of people, once they get an opinion, they dig in, no matter what they hear factually that might cut against the grain of the first opinion that they came up with during the match. So it'll be interesting to see. But there's certainly, for anybody in your audience who was fascinated by that match and wanted to know more as they were watching it, and certainly about the aftermath, and also what happened beforehand, we have a lot there. And the film is beautifully shot. There's all sorts of angles from the U.S. Open you didn't see on television. And it's so well edited and with music. It's like a 30 for 30 documentary. It's that high quality. The team that's helped me put this together is they've won, I think, 70 Emmys combined. This is an all-star team of talent to put this film together.
And speaking of your team, Don, I have a selfish question for you. I'm going to go fanboy for a minute. I just want to know what Wright is like. What is Wright Thompson like as a person?
He is a fantastic friend and a lot of fun to be around. Sometimes hard to keep up with, particularly if bourbon is part of the evening. But no, I've loved working with Wright. I'd always wanted to do a story with him. We had talked actually about doing a couple stories over the years since I joined the network. And then once this opportunity came up to create a show that has the complete backing and support of the leadership of ESPN, that was just an opportunity too good to pass up. But he's a terrific guy. Have you had him on the show? I'm sure you have, right? You've talked.
I actually have not. I was talking to my producer JP about that. We would love to get him on, and if you could be of assistance to do some on-air production work, that would be fantastic.
All right, I will absolutely. I'll be seeing him soon, and I will definitely put in a plug for you guys.
Awesome,
that's easy.
Love it. Thank you, Don. And last thing before we set you loose. Field of Dreams was one of my favorite movies growing up. You're going to attack Shoeless Joe, Black Sox 1919. I'm really looking forward to that one. So two-part question. When can we expect that? And then can you shed any light on further projects?
Yes. So the banning of Shoeless Joe is our next episode. That is tentatively scheduled to premiere on ESPN, not ABC, on ESPN in primetime on November 3rd. So right after the World Series ends, baseball fans might be, wanting to go back in time to it's 100th year anniversary of the Black Sox scandal of fixing the World Series. So we'll look at that portion of it very carefully, but we're also going to look at the banning of Pete Rose for betting on baseball, which of course happened 70 years after that, and also Major League Baseball's embrace of legalized gambling now, and how both Shoeless Joe and Pete Rose are still pariahs. They're still kept out of the Hall of Fame, why they're being kept out of the Hall of Fame. And I'm really excited about this episode because it's Shoeless Joe, Pete Rose, and then what's going on now, where some people may actually argue there's some hypocrisy on the part of Major League Baseball because their lifeblood going forward in many ways is going to be legalized gambling, and a lot of the moves they've made in the last year. So that's that episode. The third episode is tentatively titled The Catfishing of Manti Te'o, which of course I'm sure you remember that scandal from 2012, and we're really excited about that, and that'll be coming out early in 2020. We have two more episodes. We haven't revealed what those subjects are, but I'm really excited about them, and I think fans will be too.